The bombs fell like thunder from a vengeful sky, shaking the earth beneath Eleanor's feet. She clutched her medical kit tighter, her white nurse's uniform stained with mud and blood, as she dashed across the muddy field toward the cries of the wounded. "Hang on, soldier!" she shouted over the roar of artillery. Bullets whizzed past her ears, but she didn't flinch. In that moment, fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. One more life to save, one more thread in the tapestry of survival. Eleanor Ellie Thompson blinked away the memory, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly as she set down her teacup. The room around her was a far cry from the battlefields of Normandy. Soft pastel walls, floral curtains, and the faint hum of air conditioning in the Willow Creek nursing home in suburban Chicago. It was story hour in the Common Lounge, a weekly ritual where residents shared snippets of their lives. But today, Ellie's tale had the group, mostly silver-haired folks in their 70s and 80s, leaning forward in their wheelchairs and recliners, eyes wide like kids around a campfire. "Ellie, that was you? In World War II?" asked Mike Harlan, a burly Vietnam vet in his late 70s, his voice gruff but laced with awe. He'd lost a leg in Nam and rarely spoke about it, preferring to grumble about the Cubs' latest losing streak. Ellie nodded, her blue eyes sparkling under the fluorescent lights. At 94, she was the oldest resident here. A living archive of history with a sharp mind and a sharper wit. "Damn right it was me. June 1944, right after D-Day. I was 22, fresh out of nursing school in Milwaukee. Thought I was invincible. Turns out none of us were, but we acted like it anyway." The room fell silent for a beat, broken only by the distant clatter of dinner trays being prepared in the kitchen. Sarah Jenkins, a spry 72-year-old widow who'd moved in after a bad hip replacement, fidgeted with her knitting needles. "How do you find the guts for that? I can barely muster the courage to tell my kids I need help with the groceries." Laughter rippled through the group, but Ellie didn't join in. She leaned back in her armchair, her gaze drifting to the window where snow flurries danced against the Illinois twilight. "Courage ain't something you find, Sarah. It's something you build brick by bloody brick. And let me tell you, I've got stories that'll show you how." That afternoon in Willow Creek became the spark. What started as a casual gathering snowballed into something more. A lifeline for souls adrift in the quiet seas of old age. Ellie, with her Midwestern drawl and no-nonsense demeanor, became the unlikely hero, weaving tales from the greatest generation that ignited flickers of bravery in her fellow residents. Little did they know those stories would pull them from the shadows of regret and fear, urging them to face their own battles head-on. Mike Harlan had arrived at Willow Creek 2 years ago, after his wife passed from cancer. He'd been a truck driver before the war, hauling freight across the Midwest, but Vietnam had left him with nightmares that no VA counselor could fully chase away. He spent his days in the lounge, staring at the TV with the volume cranked up to drown out the echoes of gunfire in his head. But Ellie's stories? They hit different. "All right, folks," Ellie said the next week, settling into her spot with a fresh cup of decaf. The group had grown. Even Nurse Ramirez, a young Latina woman in her 30s, lingered by the door, pretending to check charts. "Last time I left you hanging on that field in France. Let me pick up from there." She painted the scene vividly. The Allied forces pushing inland after the beaches, her unit attached to the 101st Airborne. "We set up a field hospital in a bombed-out barn. Rain pouring through the holes in the roof, mud everywhere. This one kid, Private Jimmy O'Connor from Boston, comes in with shrapnel in his gut. He's 19, scared spitless, begging me not to let him die." Ellie paused, her voice steady but her eyes misty. "I wasn't a surgeon, just a nurse. But the doc was overwhelmed, so I assisted. Held that boy's hand while we dug out the metal. He kept whispering about his girl back home, how he promised her a dance at Fenway Park after the war. I told him, 'You bet your ass you're dancing, Jimmy. Now shut up and let us work.'" The residents hung on every word. Tom Wilkins, an 80-year-old former accountant with early Parkinson's, nodded slowly. His hands shook as he gripped his walker, a constant reminder of his fading independence. "Did he make it?" Tom asked, his voice thin. Ellie smiled faintly. "He did. Sent me a postcard from Boston in 46. Married that girl, had 3 kids. Courage isn't just charging into fire. It's holding on when everything says let go." Mike shifted in his seat, his prosthetic leg creaking. That night, alone in his room, he pulled out an old shoebox from under his bed. Inside were letters from his platoon buddies, yellowed and unread for decades. For the first time in years he opened one, the words blurring through tears. Ellie's story had cracked something open in him. A door to healing he'd nailed shut long ago. As weeks turned to months, Ellie's sessions became the heart of Willow Creek. Spring thawed the Chicago snow, bringing blooms to the garden outside. But inside, the real growth was happening. Ellie didn't just recount glory. She shared the grit, the fear, the loss, the quiet acts of defiance that defined her war. One rainy April afternoon, with thunder rumbling like distant artillery, Ellie dove into her time in England before the invasion. I was stationed at a base near London, training with the boys. Met this flyboy, Captain Robert Bobby Hayes from Texas. Cocky as hell with a grin that could melt butter. We danced to Glenn Miller records in the mess hall dreaming of peace. Sarah leaned in, her knitting forgotten. She'd lost her husband, Frank, to a heart attack 5 years back. Since then she'd withdrawn, avoiding family gatherings because the emptiness hurt too much. Sounds romantic, she said softly. Ellie chuckled. It was, till the Luftwaffe decided to crash the party. Air raid sirens wailin', bombs droppin' like confetti. Bobby and I were caught outside, running for the shelter. A blast knocked us flat. Shrapnel grazed his arm, but he shielded me. Ain't nothing gonna touch my girl, he said, blood trickling down his sleeve. The room was wrapped. We made it to the shelter, huddled with 100 others. In the dark, folks were prayin', cryin'. But Bobby started singin' deep in the heart of Texas, off-key as a busted fiddle. Pretty soon, half the shelter's joinin' in. Laughter in the face of death. That's courage, too. Inspired, Sarah picked up the phone that evening. Her daughter, Lisa, lived in the suburbs with grandkids Sarah barely knew. Mom? Everything okay? Lisa asked, surprise in her voice. I want to come for Easter, Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. Tell the kids Grandma's bringing stories. It was a small step, but it felt like storming a beachhead. Not everyone warmed to Ellie's tales at first. Gladys Perkins, a sharp-tongued 85-year-old from Detroit, scoffed during one session. All this war talk. What about us women who stayed home? Riveting planes in factories, rationing sugar, raising kids alone while the men were off playing hero. Ellie met her gaze evenly. Gladys, that's exactly the point. Courage wore many faces. Let me tell you about my sister Betty back in Milwaukee. She spun a yarn about Betty working double shifts at the shipyard, welding hulls for Liberty ships. One night a fire breaks out, faulty wiring. Everyone panics, but Betty grabs a fire extinguisher, charges in, saves 3 gals trapped by the flames. Got second-degree burns, but she was back at work in a week. Can't let Hitler win because of a little singe, she said. Gladys's eyes softened. She'd been a Rosie the Riveter herself, but buried the pride under layers of bitterness from a loveless marriage. After the session she approached Ellie. Your sister sounds like a firecracker. Mine too, we built B-24s at Willow Run. The two women talked late into the night, forging a friendship from shared scars. Gladys started volunteering in the home's craft room, teaching knitting to the youngsters, anyone under 80. It was her way of reclaiming the strength she'd forgotten. Word spread beyond the lounge. Dr. Emily Carter, the home's director, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a Harvard degree, sat in on a session. Mrs. Thompson, you're a natural therapist, she said afterward. These stories are doing more for morale than any pill. Ellie waved it off. Just passing the torch, document. These folks have their own wars, loneliness, illness, regret. If my yesterdays can light their tomorrows, that's enough. But Ellie's health was fading. Arthritis gnawed at her joints, and her heart fluttered like a weary bird. She pushed on, sharing more. The liberation of Paris, where she treated starving civilians amid champagne toasts. The horrors of Buchenwald, where the smell of death clung to her uniform. V-Day in London, dancing in the streets till dawn. One sweltering July day with the AC straining against a heat wave, Ellie recounted her closest brush with death. Bastogne, winter of 44. Battle of the Bulge. Surrounded by Germans, snow up to our knees, no supplies. I was in a makeshift hospital, a church basement. Wounded piling up, morphine running low. Tom Wilkins gripped his walker tighter, his Parkinson's tremors mirroring the tension in her voice. Tom had been avoiding his doctor's advice for surgery, a risky procedure to implant a deep brain stimulator. Fear paralyzed him. This Sergeant Earl Johnson from Alabama loses his leg to gangrene, screaming in pain, but when the shelling starts, he props himself up, grabs a rifle. "If the Krauts come, I'll hold him off," he growls. Died that night, but his grit kept us fighting. Ellie looked around the room. We held Bastogne because folks like Earl refused to break. Courage is choosing to stand, even when your legs give out. That hit Tom hard. The next week he scheduled the surgery. "If Ellie could face Nazis, I can face a scalpel," he told Mike. As summer faded to fall, leaves turning gold like medals on a uniform, the group faced a crisis. Willow Creek's funding was cut. Rumors swirled of closures or transfers. Panic rippled through the residents. Many had no family, no other home. During a tense session, Ellie addressed the elephant in the room. "Folks, I've seen empires crumble and rebuild. This ain't the end, it's a fight. Remember Okinawa? 45. Pacific Theater. I volunteered for the front after Europe, nursing on a hospital ship off the coast." She described the kamikaze attacks, planes diving like fiery arrows. One hits nearby, ship rocks like a bucking bronco. Water flooding in, patients screaming. I grab life vests, start evacuating. Lost friends that day, but we saved hundreds. Mike stood well, leaned on his cane. "Ellie's right. We can't just roll over." He organized a petition, rallying residents to write letters to the city council. Sarah baked cookies for a bake sale fundraiser. Gladys designed posters with her old factory flair. Tom, post-surgery and steadier, manned the phones. Ellie watched from her chair, pride swelling in her chest. Her stories had birthed a community of warriors. But time was Ellie's final foe. In late October, with Halloween decorations up, she grew frail. The group gathered around her bed in the infirmary. "One last story," she whispered. "After the war, I came home to Milwaukee. Married Bobby the flyboy. We had 2 kids, built a life. But Bobby passed young, heart attack. I wanted to curl up and die. Instead, I went back to nursing, raised those kids alone. Courage isn't one big act. It's 1,000 small ones." Mike squeezed her hand. "You've given us that, Ellie." She smiled. "Now go use it." Ellie slipped away that night, peacefully, as if marching to a victory parade. The petition worked. Willow Creek stayed open, renamed the Eleanor Thompson Wing. The residents carried on her legacy, sharing their own stories. Mike reconciled with his estranged son. Sarah hosted family reunions. Gladys mentored young volunteers. Tom walked unaided to the garden. In the lounge, a plaque read, "Courage is built brick by brick. Thanks to Ellie, we stand tall." And so, in the quiet halls of a Chicago nursing home, echoes of the past forged futures of bravery. The greatest generation's flame burned on, inspiring the next to find their light.